educational conditions and opportunities that enable all children to become actively literate, contributing and participating members of a democratic society who make a positive difference in the world. She's 25 years an educator in the Poway Unified School District and San Diego Unified. She was the principal at Central Elementary in City Heights, one of the more challenging schools in our community, where she worked passionately to attract high-quality staff, nurture innovative programs, created a highly successful biliteracy program, hands-on school garden program, quality after-school preschool, employees child daycare, and a community health and wellness center for students and their families. There was great success academically at the school, and she became then the superintendent of schools at the San Diego Unified School District. So I'm sure you all know Cindy. Welcome, Cindy. Thanks for joining us. To my far left is Roberto Alcantar, who is joined the Chicano Federation as the new senior director in the April of 2019. He was raised in San Isidro of San Diego, in the community of San Isidro, continues to be an active member of his community. He graduated from UC Berkeley with a political science and public policy degree. Has worked in the not-for-profit sector. He's an advocate for underserved communities. His extensive policy, government, organizational strategy experience. He's worked for the ACLU, the California State Senate, and San Diego City Council. He's a San Diego Leadership Alliance Fellow and was named one of San Diego's 40 leaders under 40 in 2015. Welcome, Roberto. And on my left is Charles Thorpe, with the most mysterious resume I've read in a long time. Cindy's is so clear, yours is. Charles is a professor of sociology at UCSD. He is the author of Oppenheimer, The Tragic Intellect, and Necroculture, a critique of alienation in capitalist society. A critique of alienation in capitalist society. That's going to be the next Sam Salon. That'll be the topic. So I've got to get this out of the way here. The American Dream. So I did a little research. My famous sources of Wikipedia and Webster's Dictionary. American Dream, the set of ideals, democracy, liberty, opportunity, equality, in which freedom includes the opportunity for prosperity and success, upward social mobility for family and children, achieved through hard work in a society with few barriers. There's the definition by a man, James Truslow Adams, in 1931, quote, "Life should be better and richer and fuller for everyone, with opportunity for each according to ability or achievement, regardless of social class or circumstances of birth." Webster said, which I love this one, the definition is a happy way of living that is thought of by many Americans as something that can be achieved by anyone in the U.S., especially by working hard and becoming successful. Quote, "With good jobs, a nice house, 2 children, and plenty of money, they believed they were living the American dream." End quote. So there's a critic in Seattle who wrote about the play you're to see tonight, who said, "The play is about the slow death of the lie about the American dream." After you see the play, you may very well disagree with this critic, that that's what the play about. I don't agree with him, but it's a provocative statement. The idea of the American dream being alive and well or slowly dying is provocative to discuss, so here we go. I'm going to begin by asking each of my guests to share with us what interested or intrigued you to saying yes to a public conversation on this topic. Why did you say yes to talk about this? Cindy, I should start with you.
Okay, it was an immediate yes.
Why?
The minute the email came, and I get a lot of invitations to speak for many different reasons in many different forums, some more political than others, and when this request came in, first of all, the questions were very well thought out. Second of all, I love this organization, and I love the work that this organization does for our city, and the way you bring story and the human spirit into the arts matters a lot to me. Arts and arts education is incredibly important. I have our Director of Visual and Performing Arts, Russ Sperling, here with me tonight. The arts matter, But the American dream, like, I'm in the American dream business. The American dream is about education, in my humble opinion. Of course, I might be biased in saying that as a lifelong educator, but it was an immediate yes to be able to hold a public conversation. And the way we may be divided, the way there may be cynicism and fracturing, and the way our country seems to divide things and hurt one another, what can we come together around being human? So the play tonight is important, our humanity is important, the way we bring a mindful dialogue to a tough conversation is what defines us. And I'd love to sit up here tonight and talk about it, but I want it to be something we talk about as a community, and a public education system is something that I think is what helps support the ever-evolving American dream. And I fully and fundamentally believe in the hope and the promise of public education in America, and that's why I've been doing this for over 30 years. So it was an easy yes. I'm happy to be here and honored that you put the conversation together.
Thank you. Thank you, Charles. So why did you say yes?
Well, the sociology department was contacted, and it makes sense because this is kind of the key question in sociology is,
It is?
Can you make it as an individual based on your own individual capabilities, or is your fate in life determined by social forces? So in a way, a sociologist can't say no to this. I snapped up the free tickets before my colleagues could get
And these are very honest men. No one ever says the free tickets. Thank you for saying that. Roberto, why did you say yes?
So I felt it was a responsibility of mine to say yes as a young Latino who grew up in a very low-income community, to really bring a perspective that might be different to perspectives a lot of you might have heard before. And I consider myself actually as being a result of my ancestors' wildest dreams, as someone who has the privilege to really experience this notion of the American dream, but also seeing how it's failed a lot of the people in my community. And so for me, it's about a responsibility to bring a voice for those that might not have the opportunity to be here in front of you today, and provide that unique perspective.
Do you have a personal experience with the American dream, Roberto?
Well, I mean, I am proof that, that great things can happen. 4 years ago, I decided to run for office, and got elected as a representative at Southwestern Community College District as a trustee. So I've had the privilege to go to, the world's best public university, to travel to many places all over the world, and to represent my community. So I could say that I've had a slice of the pie, but at the same time, conscious that, I am seen as an exception in my community, and I think it's time to change that.
Just checking in, what's the world's best public university?
UC Berkeley, go Bears.
Just thought I'd check in on that because no one here has an opinion about that. So we're all from UC Berkeley. Yes. Charles, do you have a personal experience? This is a good question because you're not from the United States.
No,
so.
I'm from England.
Yes, I can tell.
From London.
Yeah, you sound good.
Actually, I do in a way. I mean, not that, coming to the US as an immigrant, I suppose, I had it really easy compared to most immigrants in that I came to the university and everything was done for me and set out for me by the university. It's very different.
Did they recruit you?
Yeah, so it makes it easy. But, I first came here as a student, actually. But so, I didn't have to struggle upward in that way that the American dream is. But the classic American dream is a struggle against circumstance. You make it based on your own individual capacities and virtues. I wouldn't say I had to struggle, but there is something about America which contrasts with Britain, in that there is a real kind of openness and a lack of class boundaries between people in day-to-day interactions. A big part of that, I think, is that in Britain we have this horrible thing where you can tell someone's class by their accent, you know, and it's really a barrier, and that doesn't exist in America. There's this kind of informality in interactions in America, and a kind of civility and politeness. Have a nice day, you know, calling other people sir, you know. And all of that shows a respect for people that isn't based necessarily on economics. It's a kind of egalitarian impulse, and there's something that I found really open, and you know, I've realised I felt claustrophobic in England, and there's this greater scope for you know, interacting outside of your class position in America, which is part of the American dream, and I think there's a reality to that. Yeah.
Sandy, what about you? You have a personal experience with the American dream?
So many.
Good.
Professionally, it's working in City Heights for 10 years, and with 1,000 students, pre-kindergarten through 5th grade, most of them came to the United States from other countries, mostly Spanish-speaking, and working with families that were dealing with every risk factor known to success and achievement in the public school system in life in San Diego, watching what would happen when we would remove barriers and families coming with this idea, their own personal stories of the American dream, and what would it be like, and what was it like to remove barriers and watch families begin to achieve as we interrupted the institutional, implicit, explicit biases that were holding kids back, and bringing in resources, the gardens and the health centers and the support services before and after school, and the health center, like the things that really mattered, and putting a full arts program in. That's like my professional experience with the American dream. My personal experience, first of all, I want to say hello to my mother and my son are here, so you have 3 generations. My mom, Fern, and my son, Andrew's 25, so here's the American dream right before me, he's right there. My husband immigrated to the United States when he was 5 years old from Mexico City. And so watching him and his family and the challenges and struggles that he faced being new to the country, and then raising our son here. By the time I met him, I was 17, and my husband and I were together for 33 years. Unfortunately, he passed away just 3 years ago after having surviving 10 years after a massive stroke. So listening to and watching my husband and his family and his family's opinions of assimilation and what it was like to grow up in California, kind of watch that happen. And then my own very personal story of what happened for me is I was adopted in Chicago when I was 5 days old. And the family that gave birth to me, my biological family, was a young couple. They were 17, 18 years old, and they thought they were too young to raise a child, so they gave me up for adoption. And I'm so lucky that my mom and dad adopted me at 5 days old, and it wasn't until I was 40 years old, which was just a couple days ago. More like 13 years ago, good one, right? Well, right before my 40th birthday, my biological mother found me. And I got to learn what her story was like. After she gave me away, she and my birth father decided to get married. They stayed together, and they had a second child. And the birth father was killed in a motorcycle accident when that child was only 3 years old. I would have been 5 if I had stayed with that family. And so my biological brother grew up with tremendous struggle, a single mom. She was widowed at age 23. And so what was the American dream for my biological brother, and the life that he grew up with, and then the life that I had? I was adopted at 5 days old and grew up in a suburb, Highland Park in Illinois, lived literally on a street called Pleasant Avenue. And when we moved to San Diego, we moved to Prosperity Lane. It's a true story. And so I had this like amazing life that happened through adoption. And my older biological brother was born in the family that I was adopted into. My older brother Charlie is developmentally disabled. And then my mom and dad adopted me, and then I had a younger sister, Laura, who was not born with disabilities, but she ended up becoming paranoid schizophrenic in her early 20s. So there was struggle in the family that put me up for adoption. There was struggle in the family that adopted me. The struggle is always there. American Dream isn't saying there isn't going to be struggle. One is easy street and one isn't. There's challenge, there's struggle, there's heartbreak, and there's hope. And so how do you face all of that, I guess, is what I believe in about the American Dream and very personal experiences that I've had in my life.
This is interesting. I edited this down. I'll try to do it quickly. In 2018, there was a study of 2,411 Americans in all walks of life, rural, urban, people of color, white people, educated, uneducated, etc. The vast majority of these people, around 80%, have a different definition in mind when they talk about the American dream than what I just read a moment ago. They believe that they are living it. Like 80% of the people interviewed. They did not select as essential factors becoming wealthy, owning a home, or having a successful career.
Very spectacular about America. In fact, it doesn't look that good compared to other affluent, advanced industrial countries when it comes to social mobility. There's a study, it's now 10 years old, but from the OECD, so the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development, basically looking at the major Western economies, and they look at the relationship between a son's earnings on average and their father's earnings, and they choose males to make it easier to compare across societies that have different rates. And so this sort of chart here shows the outcome, and basically the shorter the bar, the less of a relationship there is between the father's earnings and the son's, so the more mobility there is. The higher the bar, the more your father's position is going to predict your position. And this is the US here, third from the bottom, and this is Italy and Great Britain here. So, Britain, very much a class society, and America doesn't look very different from it in terms of social mobility. The ones that do really well are Denmark, Austria, Norway, Finland, Canada. All of those have in common a welfare state. So, however, as you say, there's more to the American dream than just economic success, and I wonder whether we'd have to compare that survey to surveys in the past. But I wonder whether, there are sociologists who say we're seeing a shift towards post-materialist values, people thinking of the good life, less and less in terms of material possessions and money, and more in terms of quality of life, and things like environmental quality of life come into that as well. And so I do wonder whether the American dream is being reframed in terms of post-materialist values as the economic core, if you want to call it that, of the American dream becomes more and more out of reach.
Roberto, what do you think?
So, for me, it's a perspective I bring from my community where we basically have had to reshape the American dream to fit our circumstances. Because while thinking about the material items, that's not something that has become very attainable for our communities. So it's almost like we've been trained to think that what we have is what we should have, and at the same time, thinking that, well, maybe because we cannot achieve this level, then let's go ahead and make ourselves feel better by saying, well, we have this, so let's try to focus on this other side of things. But for a lot of us, we do see how being in a different community definitely dictates, what kind of outcome your life will have. For a lot of us, we probably think about, if we drive away from here, and if we get a flat tire, we'll call AAA or something, and we'll get, help with that, and we'll get our tire fixed right away. For some people in my community, that's economically devastating. For some people, that means that they might lose their job because they're not going to be able to make it work, right? And so thinking about, how we try to make ourselves feel like we're striving towards something, I think plays a key part in that. But then facing the reality that, we are under different circumstances sometimes, and being able to work hard towards, pulling yourself out of that. And so what I think a lot of times when I hear from folks, especially in the world that I work in with nonprofits and helping folks, it's a lot of times you hear, well, we have all the resources available for them. They just don't want to do it. Or some of these folks are lazy or they don't want to work. And I said, what's the point of having all the resources on the table if you're not thinking about how to get them to the table, right? And so we face this a lot. For example, at the community college where I'm a board member at, we serve primarily Latino students. Almost 70% of our students are Latino. And we have so many resources available for them, but we struggle in being able to get them to the table to be able to take advantage of those resources. So for a lot of us, yes, the dream is changing, but for some, they have no choice than to adapt to the reality they have and really change the perspective of the American dream for themselves.
Thanks, Roberto. Cindy.
At Central Elementary, where I was for 10 years, our school motto was work hard, be kind, dream big, no excuses. And I think that definition that you read, it's about this quality of life and not necessarily the material things. I asked my son, I said, so I'm going to talk about the American dream tonight. What do you think? What do you think of it? And he said, you don't want to hear it from me. And I'm like, I do. He's 25. And the cynicism and that, and I think he fits right into what the study you just quoted there, that he says not materialistic anymore. It's not about what you have. And there's a very poignant story at Central. We had 100% of the students were living below the poverty line. These were 1,000 students and their families. And there was a group of kids that decided they wanted to start, this is when I was vice principal there, they wanted to start the Homeless Helpers Club. And they made bracelets out of yarn or string that they found at home. And they started making bracelets and selling them for 25 cents to, I don't know who they sold them to, but they were raising money, and then they were we were calling them lucky pennies, and we started this thing called a dream jar, that every time you find a penny, you say, see a penny, pick it up, and all day you'll have good luck, and they'd be at the grocery store, the laundromat, or wherever, and they'd pick up a penny. We just kept filling up the dream jar, and when we said, work hard, be kind, dream big, no excuses. And some people would say, well, it's not nice to tell somebody who's coming from extreme poverty, challenge, and struggle to dream big because it's a trick and they're never gonna, that's not fair. And I said, well, but you have to dream beyond what your current circumstance is, and what could that be like? And so we decided that at the end of every year, we'd add up the dream jar, and we believe that the abundance that comes into your life should go back out again. And so whatever has shown up in your life, you have gratitude for that, and you put it back out. So at the end of the year, the kids would come together and they decide what to do with that money that was found lucky pennies from a whole year worth of collecting them. And so one year they decided that they were going to purchase stuffed animals and coloring books and crayons and markers to take to the Rady Children's Hospital Trauma Center. So if a child was in a accident and had to go to the emergency room and didn't have a teddy bear with them, there'd be a teddy bear there. That's what they used the money for. And this group of kids at the end of the year, they decided they also wanted to walk down to the grocery store, use the pennies that were left from the Homeless Helpers Club to help people that were homeless. There were 14 kids in the Homeless Helpers Club. 6 of them were actually homeless themselves. But they didn't think of themselves as homeless. They didn't think of themselves as poor or didn't have enough. They weren't thinking in terms of lack or not enough. They were thinking of what can I do to help my community. And I saved this little box, they had a little plastic box. We walked down to Albertsons together and bought all the groceries, and we took it to JFS, Jewish Family Services, the food pantry there, and dropped off the food. I want you to know that happened, it's gotta be 15 years ago now. Just last week, I got a letter from Rose, one of the girls in the Homeless Helpers Club, thanking me and sending me a picture of herself graduating with honors from UC Davis in a degree in environmental education, and she's moving back to City Heights, and she wants to work on environmental education. And she said, and Mrs. Marten, I remember the Homeless Helpers Club that I was in when I was with you at Central. I was bawling when I got this letter. So she friended me on Facebook, and she's graduated. She's taking a semester off. She's traveling all over the world right now, and she's going to come back and look for a job in San Diego. So anybody that wants to hire someone in environmental education, but this idea of they didn't think of themselves the way society thought of them. Put them in the, 100% below the poverty line, and they're going to need help and assistance. They are brilliant, and they knew they were brilliant. So it's all about your own definition and perspective.
I just have to say that a number of years ago, we did 3 shows in City Heights, and we stole the name from the festival. We called our shows Around the World in a Single Day, which was the name of the festival, right? That the City Heights put on a festival, a street fair. It was called Around the World in a Single Day. And this is a community that you know better than I probably, 57 languages and 40 ethnicities or more. One of the more amazing places I've ever been in my life. We did a lot of work in the community. And I was a complete outsider. Because all the people that I encountered were from some other place and had been displaced on the planet to City Heights. So their idea of the American dream was salvation, one, because a lot were refugees from politically dangerous places. And the negotiation of what opportunity meant. It's sort of what you're saying, Roberto, that your perspective, depending on where you are, it's interesting to hear what you say as the definition of the American dream. Is it different now than it was? I'm really asking this question. Is it different than what we used to think of the 2 cars in the garage and the house? Has it changed?
Well, I think it's ever evolving. I think it's
Okay.
never one thing. It's always in the heart and the mind of the person, your own personal definition of it. It's very different for each person. Even back then, it might be, in the dictionary or Wikipedia or wherever you look it up, or in the sociology textbooks, there's a definition. But I think it's very personal and very individual.
What do you think, Charles? Has it changed?
I think that the economic idea of mobility has actually always been wrapped up in other values, and that the American dream has never been purely economic. The New York Times article that refers to the 80% people feeling they have, it says it emphasizes the notion of freedom as central to the American dream. And that has an economic dimension to it, the notion that you're free to leave behind the circumstances of your birth, right? But it also has a political dimension, political freedom. And it's interesting that the Declaration of Independence refers to the pursuit of happiness, along with these other political rights.
Right.
So, so I think that it's very much, it was never completely material. But I think that perhaps today, with rising inequality and the kind of structural barriers that creates for people at the bottom economically, that perhaps the connection between economic freedom and political freedom is now less clear, and that those things have pulled apart from one another.
The word choice is mentioned in this article, the freedom to choose, which I think is a very interesting definition of the American dream. You have the freedom to choose or not. Roberto, you want to say something?
Yeah, I do feel that it has changed in the sense that, there was this notion that the American dream was you have, your household with mom and dad, kids, and you have this house with a backyard and 2 cars. And part of it is that, we're dealing with very different economic circumstances now. And as we become more globalized, our stance as a country economically has changed. But also, I feel that there's been this notion that we have to convince ourselves that everything's okay and that we're going to be fine, when in reality, a lot of us are not okay and we're not going to be fine. And I can tell you that for someone like me to be able to go to UC Berkeley and graduate, I had to do almost everything perfectly. Because one misstep would have caused me to drop out, to not be able to get that opportunity. And there's a lot of folks like that in my community who have to walk a very perfectly fine line, because any mistake could become economically devastating. And so, and it's interesting for me as a young person to sometimes see, how our media tries to spin this idea that well, it's your fault that you're young and you don't have a job or that you don't have a home, because here's this example. So recently I read an article about how this young staffer in DC working in Congress is making $45,000 a year. He's living a great life and owns a home. But then you read the asterisk and says, well, his parents gave him $80,000 towards a down payment. His parents paid off, his student loans. So there was all these different notions that say, for a lot of us, that's not the reality of this. And so there's definitely a shift towards, saying, well, economically, it's more putting the burden on us as individuals to make it a reality, whereas before, the government and society played a bigger, more collective role in ensuring that people could be economically successful and have that freedom of mobility and freedom to choose, because you had households that needed only one person working. Now you could have households with 2 people working 2 to 3 jobs each and still can't make it, right? We've seen how the housing crisis created this mass exodus of folks who now had to move to Tijuana just to be able to make it. And they're having to cross the border every day. And so, it reminds me of one of the recent movies that came out, Joker, right? And there was this one line that really stuck with me where he said, I hope my death makes more sense than my life. CENTS. And when I look at a lot of the economic situations that a lot of folks are, and I've heard this joke before, it's like, I'm worth more dead than alive. So yeah, I think there's definitely been a change, and a lot of it has now been the burden of being successful has been put on us as individuals more so than in the past.
How many people here in this audience believe that your life is a manifestation of the American dream? Did you raise your hands? I'm just curious. Don't worry, you're not going to be arrested or given anything. There are no prizes tonight. I'm just curious. So like half of us. I certainly do. So, what would you like to leave us with tonight? My favorite question. As we go out and watch the play and go to the concession stand and walk around. Charles, you ready to go?
Well, it's just something that I thought of, that we think of the post-war decades, the 50s and 60s, at a time when there was the affluent society, and we look back on this as this sort of golden age. As you mentioned suburbanization, the 2-car garage, but there were a lot of people at that time who didn't have access to the American dream. I mean, we think the family life is an important part of it, but then Betty Friedan wrote the female eunuch, the problem with no name. That women in those nuclear families in the 50s and early 60s maybe weren't actually so happy. They were trapped there. Blacks before the civil rights movement did not have access to the American dream. Gays, didn't have the freedom that they do now. There's all sorts of ways in which, especially culturally, we're so much freer than we were in that period. So avoid easy nostalgia again.
Roberto, what would you like to leave us with tonight?
I like to leave with basically just going back to this notion of different perspectives and touching upon some of what you just mentioned right now, is that this idea of the American dream was a very kind of this idea in a predominantly white-dominated society, right? And so what we're seeing is a shift in the American dream based on what it means for a lot of us, and really understanding that our view is different, and I see this conflict sometimes, for example, in the environmentalist movement. And they say, we need to do more public transportation and better access to that. But for a lot of us who grew up in San Isidro, we're sick and tired of public transportation. And having our own car is a way to say, we did it. We're successful because now I can move on my own terms, right? And so while now there's this idea that we need to push people towards public transportation, which is a great idea, and yes, we need to help our environment, it's a bit different perspective for a lot of us who grew up when public transportation was dangerous, unreliable, and unsafe. So for us, really, it's thinking about, we're seeing this whole notion of our current president who talked about making America great again, right? And for a lot of us, we're thinking, well, America is great because I can actually have a shot now, right? I actually have an opportunity now as a person of color to be successful. And now you're telling me that you want to go back to the ways where I didn't have those rights, where I didn't have that access. So I think the notion of the American dream dying is more of a, it's really just, it's changing from being a white-dominated predicament to now being much more culturally, shifting towards, what America looks like now.
Well, it's interesting because you're referencing the freedom to choose. When you talk about the car,
Yep.
the freedom to choose. I want to drive a car. I don't want to take public transportation. It's a freedom of choice. Cindy.
So the one thing that's remained constant, whether you have a more materialistic definition of the American dream or more about freedom to choose and I feel happy with my family or life circumstance, no matter what your definition, the thing that has remained constant and I think will remain constant is education. And a high quality public education system that doesn't serve just some people, but serves every single child no matter which neighborhood they live in. That's what San Diego Unified's Board of Education is committed to. In 2009, when they wrote Vision 2020, a quality school in every neighborhood was all about this idea that no matter where you live, no matter what life circumstance you're experiencing, you can walk across the street from, if it's Section 8 housing or you live in a situation where your family's experiencing a loss of a job or somebody's been deported or incarcerated or addicted or absent because of 3 jobs, that child and that's living in a tough circumstance can walk across the street to their neighborhood school and get an education worthy of their hopes and their dreams. And that's what the Board of Education is committed to. I have been at Central for 10 years. When they appointed me superintendent in 2013, I'm starting my 8th year now. Vision 2020 has been accomplished. We're writing Vision 2030 now. And it's this idea of what do we need to do as a public education system to invest in the conditions and circumstances so students get what they need, when they need it, in the way that they need it, and where there's greater need, there needs to be greater investment. And when in some of our schools, San Diego Unified has over 100,000 kids, and across the city, some come from very different circumstances, but we invest with an equity-based model. Where there's greater need, we put greater resources in our schools because children deserve every opportunity possible, and public schools can be an equalizer, can be the democratic approach that it was meant to be, and we'll continue to fight for adequate funding at the state level for our schools because we believe it matters.
One of the great joys of being in this job is I get to meet people who are committed to, if you will, pardon the word, the enlightenment of the culture we live in. I like to use that word because I think that's my job, in part. And certainly we're meeting 3 people tonight who are committed to the rising tide to lift this community up, and I applaud you for that. And I thank you for being here. And I think all of you, this is Sam's Salon, I'm Sam. We do this on the Thursday after opening night for every show. And our next salon is in March 12, thank you. My friend on the end always knows the date. Do you know what the topic is?
Women's rights, changing narratives, changing female narratives, entertainment,
In the arts, in literature, in narratives, because the play is all about women in charge of their lives, their future, in the royal harem in Delhi in 1666. Just thought I'd promote that. But thank you, Roberto, and thank you, Cindy. Thank you, Charles. And thank you all for coming. Enjoy the show. Thank you.
Wow, you made it up. Good for you.